There was a way to make the clock on my phone stay there. I know there is.
There is. All right, we are going to go radio silent, and I will see you in 2 minutes.
All right.
I'm going to see you anyway, but.
Yeah, we'll be here. Let's see.
Okay, we're starting in 1 minute. Quiet, please. Right. Letting everyone in. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll be letting everyone in for the next 2 minutes, and then we will get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Just 1 more minute and then we will get started. We're just letting everyone into the meeting now. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour, a presentation from Behringer-Crawford Museum. I'm Tara Johnson-Noem, your host. So nice to see so many familiar faces. This is our 6th episode, and it's so nice that many of you have been regular attenders. It's nice to see you, and thank you so much for supporting Behringer-Crawford Museum and local Northern Kentucky history. Tonight, we have a special guest who we actually had last week as well. Jeannine Kreinbrink is with us. If you missed the last episode or any of the previous episodes, you can see them on Behringer-Crawford's Facebook page. Just search Behringer-Crawford Museum and you'll be able to find most of the past episodes there. We have a few more people joining us, but I'll go ahead and say thank you so much to our sponsors and the supporters of the museum. Many of you I know are members of the museum, and our members are such an important way that we are able to support local history, culture, and music and art. So thank you for all of the members. Also, thank you to the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation. Oops, we still have a few people joining us. Thanks to those who are joining now. We appreciate you being with us tonight. Let's see. Well, I think it's about time to get started, Jeannine. Jeannine Kreinbrink has a rich breadth of experience as an archaeologist in Northern Kentucky. She has a degree from Northern Kentucky University and is the co-founder of her own firm that focuses on cultural resources and archaeology. She started her career working with Ellis Crawford when he was excavating Big Bone Lick State Park before it was a state park. And she is responsible for the national landmark status that Big Bone has today. We are very pleased to have her with us tonight because she also has been instrumental in excavating many of the batteries in Northern Kentucky that were the topic of tonight's conversation. And we are really thrilled to have her. But if you want to learn more about her, her full bio is on our website. I'm going to get right to it and let you get started, Jeannine. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, actually, I want to say one more thing very quickly before you get started. I do have everyone muted. So if you would like to make a question or a comment, please use our chat feature, and I'll be taking notes throughout the presentation, and I'll make sure that we get to your question at the end. Thanks so much. Jeannine?
All right. Well, I didn't actually work with Ellis Crawford, my father and my older brother. So I did meet him when I was a child, and I did write my master's thesis on one of his sites. So I will now share my screen, and we'll get going here. Slideshow. There's slideshow. There we go. Can everybody see that? Oh, it's went to the end. Everybody's going to see the whole slideshow. Oh, go real fast. I'm not sure why it went all the way. There we go. All right. Can everybody see that? Tara? All right. Okay. So are you muted too?
I'm muted as well. Sorry. Yes, we can see just fine, Jeannine. Thank you so much.
It's like, wait a minute. All right. We're going to talk this evening about the two men who designed and built the Northern Kentucky Civil War fortification system, and a little bits of other information thrown in as well. A lot of maps tonight. We're going to talk about Charles Whittlesea and James Herbie Simpson. If you missed last week, we are not going to talk about the overall history tonight. You can go watch that on Facebook if you missed last week. Otherwise, we're going to kind of pick up this week. And I don't know why my down is not working. Okay, we'll do it this way. All right. This is the 1877 map, the published map that was published in the big giant book of all the Civil War maps. We looked at this a little bit last week. We're actually going to be looking closer at two other maps, and we probably won't be coming back to this one, but just to get you oriented, if we can all see the arrows, here's Cincinnati, Covington, Newport. This is the fortification line as it was finalized. All right. This is the close-up of the title of that map, and it talks about who were the people that were involved, and it says, commenced under Brigadier General Ormsby M. Mitchell, U.S. Volunteers by Colonel Charles Whittlesea, and extended under Major General H.G. Wright in 1862 by Major James H. Simpson, Chief Topographical Engineer, Department of the Ohio, plus his assistants, Captain Merrill, Lieutenant Tardy, and then Mr. Charles Whittlesea, who came back to help. We'll talk about that. And also General Burnside in 1863, when Simpson had been made a lieutenant colonel, and Captain McAllister of the Corps of Engineers. And so this map, the final date on it is 1864, and there's Simpson's signature down there at the bottom. All right. So Union interest in protecting the vital river traffic, railroad lines, and commerce of Cincinnati, Newport, and Kentucky began at the start of the war in April. And in May, they sent Captain Orlando Metcalf Poe, pictured here, in the topographical engineers, to the Cincinnati area to start to map and figure out where they could set out fortifications. Nothing came of that. There is a hand-drawn sketch map that I was trying to find, but flash drive with some of my Civil War stuff was not cooperating this week, so I don't have that map right now. But he did make a little sketch map that really was very, very rudimentary. In September 1861, General Mitchell sent Colonel Charles Whittlesea to begin work on the defenses. We'll talk a little bit about Charles. He's a very interesting man. He was born in 1808 in Connecticut, graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and served in the United States Army during the Black Hawk War. I don't know whether he met Lincoln there or not. He studied law in Cleveland. He was also an editor of the Cleveland Herald in the 1830s. He served as an assistant geologist of Ohio. And during surveys of the state, he documented many Native American sites. During the Civil War, Whittlesea immediately enlisted in the Union Army. His unit actually escorted, so I guess he did meet him, President-elect Abraham Lincoln. Hold on, I don't know why this is, there we go. Can you see that? I've got a thing on my screen that's blocking my words. All right.
You can move that to the side, probably, but yes, we see it just fine as a regular presentation. Okay, good.
So anyway, his unit escorted President-elect Abraham Lincoln from his home in Illinois to Washington, D.C., and that's the route that they took to get him there. In April 1861, Whittlesea became the assistant quartermaster general for Ohio troops and also served as chief engineer for Ohio's military units. And he left Cincinnati. We're going to go through his biography a little bit. We'll come back to 1861. He left Cincinnati early 1862 and was transferred to more active duty with the 20th Ohio Infantry and was forced to leave his fortification system unfinished. And we'll come back to that. As a colonel, he participated in battles of Fort Donelson and Shiloh, and he resigned from the military in April 1862 due to ill health, and then he went back to Cleveland, Ohio. So while he was here in September, October of 1861, Whittlesea built Fort Mitchell, which you can see a drawing here. Several cannon batteries on the Cincinnati side of the Ohio River and 8 on the Kentucky side. This piece of map that you see here was a map that Whittlesea drew in the fall of 1861. And we're going to talk more about that here in a little while because it actually got lost for a very long time, including between 1861 and 1862. These are some close-ups of the title of the map, accompanying a report on the defenses of Cincinnati, November 1st, 1861, and a legend where an open box represents works constructed and a solid line represents ones he wanted to build. And then these are like rifle trenches proposed, and the X's are where he wanted to put all different kinds of timber protections. This is another piece of the map. Here, Ludlow Hill becomes Coombs Battery, and it was actually built in 1861. Bald Knob was not built. You can see the solid line. And in 1862, Bates Battery was built in this location. This is a great drawing. I can't show you the whole map because it's about 3 feet by 4 feet. It's a very large map. And we'll get to the exciting part of how we found it again here shortly. So there's another section of the map, Fort Mitchell, Kyle's Battery, which becomes Hooper, Brickyard and Quarry, which are above 30 Highway, Route 17. Here's Lexington Turnpike, and this becomes Kyle's Lane later on. This is a section of his map. The original map is 3 by 4 feet. Whittlesea mailed it with his report in November 1861. And it was presumably filed, but was lost again until the late 1960s when Chester Giesland saw it, and then again when I found it in 1997. And I actually have a letter written in September. You see at the bottom, it says Major Simpson put in charge of the fortification system in September 1862, looked for but could not find the map. So they actually called Whittlesea out of retirement to come down and help work on it because they couldn't find it. And here's a letter. If you all see my picture, this is a copy of a handwritten letter. And it says, please send the map made by Colonel Whittlesea in December last, including the environs of Covington and Newport, defenses in the rear of these towns, and his report. If not in your department, please inquire at Adjutant General. They couldn't find his map. And I found out later why. And we'll get to that probably in another slide. These are a list of the batteries that he built. So we have Price Hill has 2 platforms. Mount Adams had 2 platforms, went to Catholic Church. The Kentucky side, these are the ones that he built. So we have several in Campbell County and the rest are all in Kenton County. All right, so we get to our trivia question, and then I'll tell you the exciting story of the map. So upon resigning his commission, Whittlesea returned to his geological studies in Cleveland. So the trivia question tonight is, what historical society did Whittlesea found and serve as president until his death in 1886? It's a very famous historical society in Ohio. Where he's from should give you a clue. And the picture here is another clue, if you know where this is. And we'll answer this at the end. Whittlesea authored approximately 200 books and articles, most on geology and Ohio's early history. So let's talk about this map. So he mailed this map with his report in November 1861. And I found out in 1997 that when letter reports were mailed to the Department of the Ohio, which is what he was involved with, or to Washington, they were supposed to be filed by the date they were sent and the first letter, the last name of the person sending the report. So it should have been filed under W for Whittlesea. Well, it was misfiled. And so they couldn't find it in 1862. And no one saw this map until Chester Giesland, who wrote Our Moment of Glory in the Civil War, went to the National Archives in the late 1960s. He saw this map. And apparently when they put it back, they misfiled it. They just put it back where they found it. And so they didn't fix where they put it. They just put it back in the same wrong place. But he had a microfilm images of pieces of this map. And for whatever reason, he chose not to use it in his book. So in his book, Our Moment of Glory in the Civil War, he says that all of the batteries were built in 1862 because of the siege of Cincinnati. We know now that's not true. Well, in say 1996, I was doing research with Behringer-Crawford on the Civil War. And so we're trying to find as much information as we can. And I went looking for Chester Giesland's papers. And I thought, well, he had to have had notes and papers. And I found out that some of them were at the Cincinnati Historical Society. So I go over there and the lady pulls out a box and we're going through the box and there's a thing of microfilm and it says National Archives. So we put it in the reel and start scrolling through it. It's a map I've never seen before. And the date on it says 1861. And so this woman and I got all excited. We're like, what the heck is this? We have no idea. So she printed out copies of it. And it was a really bad, anybody that's old enough to remember really bad Xerox paper from the 1960s, that smelly kind of shiny paper. So pieces of this map were printed on this shiny paper. So she printed me some copies from the microfilm, including the title of it. And the Cincinnati Civil War Roundtable actually paid for me to go to Washington. So January 1997, I go up to Washington, I walk into the National Archives with these printouts, and I said, find me this map. It's here somewhere. It had no catalog numbers on it. It took them 3 days. And so the last day I'm there, this guy literally comes running down the hallway, waving papers, and he pulls out Whittlesea's original letter. So I got to see the original handwritten letter, and he has this thing, you see my hands, it's about that big. And he starts unfolding it on this table and unfolding it and unfolding it. It's a 3 by 4 foot map, folded up to that big. And you can see the lines on here, all these vertical lines, those are the folds from how this was folded. And so we unfold this, and it was too big to make copies of that day. So they made copies of Whittlesea's letter, a whole bunch of other stuff I got while I was up there, Simpsons reports, etc. They mailed me copies, every copy they made of that map, a big map tube. And over the years, I've tried to scan little bits of it and try to put it together. And we finally were able to get it scanned at FedEx. And so we've been working on trying to manipulate it so we can actually use the image because it was hand drawn on kind of a almost tracing paper. And I keep looking every year or two. I get on the National Archives website to see if it's on there, if they've uploaded it onto their website, and it's not there. So I sent an email to the National Archives, and hopefully they can find it. So we can finally get better scans of it than this. So anyway, that's the exciting story of Whittlesea's lost map. All right, so let's move on down here. Hopefully everybody got the trivia question. All right, what's the Historical Society? So now we're going to move on to our next gentleman, and his name is James Herbie Simpson. That's his picture right there. He also graduated from West Point. He participated in the Seminole Wars in Florida. He was born in 1813 in New Jersey. By 1838, he was a first lieutenant in the Corps of Topographical Engineers for the U.S. Army. He was promoted to captain in 1853, and he became the chief topographical engineer for Utah Territory. And during that decade, he marched more miles through the West than any other surveyor and topographer. And among geographers and other people, he's very famous out West. I mean, you can see Chaco Canyon and Santa Fe on this. This is a drawing that he made, grants of the trails that he mapped while he was out there. Very interesting gentleman. In the Civil War, he came back and to do his duty, and he served the Union Army as an officer in New Jersey. He was unfortunately captured by the Confederates and was released in a Confederate exchange in August 1862. He immediately resigned his volunteer commission and went back to the engineers. And from there, he was quickly sent to Cincinnati to help work on the fortification system. And there's another letter that says, and this one is from General Wright. And he says, there's a great want of engineer officers here. The only one who has been assigned and has not yet reported. And this is dated September 6th. Please send me as many as you can. So he's looking for engineers. Simpson showed up, I think, the next day. And the reason he was late is because he had just been furloughed from the Confederates. So they bring Whittlesea back to help him because they can't find his map. And so he starts renovating and building and working on the fortification system. And here's Battery Bates and Battery Shaler drawings. All of these drawings were drawn by Simpson. And his signature is on a lot of these down here in the corner. So he worked on this between September of 1862 and the summer of 1863. He was also the chief engineer of the Department of the Ohio. Here's another Fort Mitchell and Fort Whittlesea drawing. This is Fort Whittlesea over here. He was promoted to a lieutenant colonel in June 1863 and took over command of all fortifications in Kentucky and held that post till the end of the war. This is Simpson's 1862 map, and we're going to look at this map in detail. I was able to get a really high quality image off of the National Archives, compiled by the order of Major General Wright, commanding chiefly from surveys made under the direction of Major J.H. Simpson, and then his assistants listed underneath. This is a great map, and we'll come back to it. In March 1865, he got a field promotion to brevet colonel and then brigadier general. And after the war, he became the chief engineer for the Interior Department. So he was he's the engineer for the Interior Department. Retired to Minnesota and died 1883. Here's his grave marker. He wrote several books about his Southwest U.S. adventures, and other people have written about him as well. Very interesting guy. All right, so let's look at his map a little bit closer. And I have another report that he wrote actually in 1864, where he names every battery and who they were named for. So we'll run through that here real quick. So the first one, and you can see the fairgrounds, all of you Ludlow people up here. Here is where Kirby Smith Battery was, over on the edge. I'm sure long gone. We've never been able to find any evidence of it. And Kirby Smith was named after Colonel J.L. Kirby Smith of the 43rd Ohio Volunteers. He was a first lieutenant of the Topographic Engineers as well, and he died October 12th, 1862 in Corinth, at the Battle of Corinth, Mississippi. Battery Coombs, which was also built in 1861 and then upgraded, it had barracks out there. It was named after General Leslie Coombs of Kentucky, and I've got some of this a little bit later as well. And here's Bates Battery, and it's kind of funny because there were people named Bates who lived in this area, but it's not named for them. It's named for Brigadier General Joshua Bates, who was and I'll quote, read this, a patriotic and zealous citizen of Ohio, conspicuous in the organization of Ohio Volunteers at the commencement of the present rebellion and in the defense of Cincinnati. So he thought a lot of Joshua Bates. Here is the continuation of his battery. This was an old battery that Whittlesea called Riggs Battery. There were people named Riggs in the vicinity that was abandoned. Perry Battery was named after A.F. Perry of Cincinnati, who helped with the volunteers during September of 1862. Fort Mitchell. Kyle Battery, and this is the Lexington Turnpike. I-75 comes right through here. And took out the Kyle House and Kyle Battery when it came through in the late 1950s. The Cray is under the subdivisions, and here is what becomes Hooper Battery. And Hooper was named after William Hooper. He was a banker, and he gave them money in September of 1862. You see down here at the bottom where it says work proposed. This drawing is from the fall of 1862, and they did not build Fort Wright until the summer of 1863. Here's another picture of this map where you can see there's Hooper, Carlisle, Burbank, Hatch, Burnett, and Lars Anderson stretched along the ridges above Independence Turnpike or 30 Highway. And here's the Pontoon Bridge. I find it really interesting that nowhere on anybody's map do they show Camp King, which was an enlistment and recruitment center somewhere in South Covington, Latonia, maybe near the Pontoon Bridge. There's no map that shows exactly where Camp King was. And I don't know if that was on purpose, why they did that, but it's not listed on, shown on any of these maps. So all of these were named for various people. Carlisle was George Carlisle, a Cincinnati guy who also gave him money. Burbank was Sidney Burbank, was a colonel of the 2nd U.S. Infantry, who was the commandant of Cincinnati. Battery Hatch was named after George Hatch, the mayor of Cincinnati. It's kind of funny because Battery Hatch is the smallest battery, and Hatch was actually a Southern sympathizer. So I guess he felt like he had to name one after the mayor of Cincinnati. He didn't name one after the mayors of Covington and Newport, though. Battery Buford, Major General John Buford, General Assistant Inspector General of the USA, who died during the war before he named them. Battery Burnett, Robert Burnett, the same one that Burnett Avenue is named after in Cincinnati. He was president of the U.S. Sanitary Commission in Cincinnati. Lars Anderson, who is also a Cincinnati guy who gave them money. Let's go over this side. We're going over to the Campbell County side. Down here at the bottom, it says St. John's Hill Battery. This was later named Wiggins Battery after Samuel Wiggins, who gave them money. Let me see here. Holt Battery here, which you can visit. It's in the apartment complex. This is Mock Road here in Route 9. Holt is after Colonel Joseph Holt, Judge Advocate General, and the late Secretary of War. And then there are several up here at the north here. There's Harrison and McLean. Harrison is Lieutenant Montgomery Pike Harrison, a worthy and gallant officer killed by hostile Indians near the Colorado River in 1849. I suspect he might have known him when he was out west. McLean is Major Nathaniel H. McLean, Assistant Adjutant General. And here's a battery Shaler up in the corner, and we'll come over here. Okay, here's the eastern end. Battery Shaler is named after Dr. Nathaniel Shaler, who also excavated at Big Bone Lick, by the way. And he is the owner of that property. Fort Burnside, after Ambrose Burnside, late commander of the Department of the Ohio, which it's not shown here because they hadn't built it yet. It was built in 1863, and it's right over here in that vicinity. Battery Grossbeck, which is not shown at all and is kind of over here, was named after William Grossbeck, another Cincinnati guy who gave him money. They had a lot of Cincinnati guys who gave them money, and I guess they felt obligated to name the batteries after them. This is also known as Beechwood's Battery, and Phil Kearney, and he was a major general, and he was killed in Chantilly, Virginia in September 1862. Fort Whittlesea, of course, he named after Charles Whittlesea. And Battery Lee, which is not on here because they hadn't built it yet. They built that in 1863, is a small battery overlooking the Ohio River. Yeah. So another very important aspect to their construction was the use of a book, a very famous book, called A Treatise on Field Fortifications by Dennis Hart Mahan, who was a professor at West Point, and probably either their teacher or they knew him when they were there, since they both were engineers. And the book is amazing. A long time ago, before the internet, I stood at the photocopier in the rare book room at the Cincinnati Library and copied this entire book. I can't remember how much it cost me at the time, but I stood and copied the entire book, and I suspect it's online now. These are a couple images of powder magazines and a drawing elements of a typical fortification. His book has a definition for all the terms, and they all used it. In fact, there is another letter, a requisition that says special requisition for copies of Mahan's field fortifications for the use of non-commissioned officers of the U.S. Engineers, and he wants 10 copies of Mahan's book. So they all had this book in their hand when they're trooping around the hills of Northern Kentucky, building the fortifications. And it defines every one. It tells you how to lay them out. Best place to build them on the hillside, and on and on. Just a fascinating book. I feel like that sort of thing, which I do. So I just got a few images here of the batteries. I think we're doing okay on time. This is Battery Coombs, which is our battery we kind of keep hidden over there in DeVue Park. This is an original sketch. There's a whole stack of these sketches, and unfortunately nobody signed them. I don't know if Simpson did them or one of his assistants, because none of them have the artist's name. This shows the barracks at Battery Coombs, which presumably is this area over here with the little hill right there. And then there's the barracks. It had officers' quarters and other things as well. Battery Bates, the drawing of Battery Bates, which very closely matches what we find up there. This is, the photo is actually an outwork that's down at the bottom of the hill. You can see here. This is Battery Holt. Back in, what's the date on this? 1994. Yep, 1994. People from COVAS, Central Ohio Valley Archaeology Society, helped me, and we went out and we did a drawing of Battery Holt. And this is kind of oriented. Here's north going up, and this north is at the top on this drawing. And Holt was interesting because it was semicircular. It was kind of different than the other batteries, I suspect, made to fit at the end of this narrow ridge. And this is the earthwork as we mapped it in 1994. And these are cross sections that we did at these three lines. So you can see it's eroded quite a bit, but it's still semicircular, or at least it was then. And it's in a little wooded area next to the office of the apartment building on top of the hill. And you can pull in there and go look at it. This is Battery Perry, which was lost to development around 2003, 2004. This is a drawing that we made of what we saw. North is this way, so I'm not really sure. This was a definite earthwork. You can see the profile. If you turn this, you can see the profile. It's still pretty tall. I suspect this is probably this part here, and the rest is just eroded away. It was unfortunately destroyed by development. I made this drawing, I don't know what year, probably 1994. We were trying to document all of them as best we could that were still there. Luckily, we did this before it was gone. And Fort Mitchell, of course. Here's the big white house that starts the north end of where Fort Mitchell was located. It was a fully bastioned earth fort. And here's Battery Hooper. If you've been up there, you'll know the work that's been done up at Battery Hooper. Here's a few odds in it. I don't know why this got all messed up. I apologize. We have Burbank, Carlisle, and Burnett. And then here's an actual picture of rifle trenches at Perry. I lost some of my pictures from there, but there is one. I don't know why that got messed up. All right. So after they finished the construction, you know, we know about the emergency, September 1862. Once they finished everything, they were fully stocked with guns. 19 of the 25 or so actually had guns, and that's what this table is. And it tells you what kind of guns. I mean, Battery Buford had a 100-pound Parrott gun, so a big gun. And then all of the other ones, and here are the guns that they had. And these are the guns that were still there in May of 1865. So they kept these fully staffed with about 150 soldiers, but fully armed until the end of the war. And I have, where's Simpson's letter? All right. So this is a letter that Simpson wrote in May of 1865. And he says, May 16th, he says, to say that I have the honor in obedience to your instructions to say that I have inspected the forts and batteries under my charge in Covington and Newport and find them, with the exception of Fort Whittlesea, in fair condition. So Whittlesea was apparently in bad condition. Annex, please find the list of ordnance and ordnance stores, and that's the table that you're looking at. The number of troops at present guarding the works aggregate 2 commissioned officers and 113 soldier rank and file. In regard to the disposition of the fortifications, which require immediate report, I respectfully state that inasmuch as the power of the so-called Confederate States has been effectively crushed by the surrender of all its armies, there is no possibility of any organized body of insurgents again attempting an assault, and none of the works have barracks proper and sufficient for the accommodation of permanent garrisons. It is my judgment all these fortifications should be dismantled of their guns, and the guns and ammunition be shipped to Allegheny Arsenal, Pittsburgh, for preservation. In regard to the lumber built in the fortifications, it would bring but little when torn down or excavated. It would compensate somewhat for the use and damage of the grounds on which the forts are situated, in restoring the same to the owners to let them have the disposal of it. So they gave them back piles of dirt and rotting wood at the end of the war and said, you know, do with it what you can, and gave them back their land because they had obviously requisitioned the land and not paid them for it. A few people, as I mentioned last week, did file claims and did receive some compensation if, say, they destroyed orchards and things like that. Is Paul on here? Paul Weisenberger, are you on here? I don't know if he's on here this week or not. He was supposed to be on here because he asked me about Sanford Town. So I have the Sanford Town story. And this is from the 1877 map. You can see Sanford Town right here. This is Horse Branch and Orphanage Road. Dudley Pike comes down over here, just off the map. But this whole area is Sanford Town. It's around where I-275 crosses 17 now. So this was reported in an early 20th century newspaper. Local citizens and soldiers on a forward picket line confronted Confederate soldiers near Sanford Town. According to the story, the Confederate commander wore a hat similar to the one worn by John Hunt Morgan. And so the storyteller, who was a young teenager during September of 1862, claims that it was John Hunt Morgan who came riding up into Sanford Town during the siege of Cincinnati. There's no record of it. I put unlikely. The storyteller assumed it was John Hunt Morgan. The Confederates pulled an American flag from the Weisenberger house. And there was no skirmish or gunfire. There were forward pickets. All right, so this is Highland. This is Horse Branch. This hill, if you can see my arrow right here, has great boards, your terraces on it. And the family that has owned this property since the Civil War have family stories of soldiers camping out on those terraces. And they called those forward pickets, where they were camped out to keep an eye on things in front of the fortification lines. And so presumably this all took place somewhere right in this vicinity. All right, we have about reached the end. I have the answer on the next slide whenever you're ready, Tara, so we can do the answer if anybody's made any guesses on the Historical Society.
Okay, can you hear me, Jeannine?
I can.
Okay, great.
Yep.
I hit a button and now I can't see everybody. So I'm just going to pull up the chat. I think we are ready. We have a number of answers. And so I think we are ready to see what the official answer is.
It is the Western Reserve Historical Society.
There we go. Well, not only did Jim Antel win our prize, but he is actually a repeat prize winner.
Oh, I know he won last week.
Yeah. So Mr. Antel, I just wanted you to know, I went ahead and addressed, I don't want to show it too long because I don't want anybody to have to see your address, but I have it and I addressed your card. And so I'm going to get it in the mail with both of your buttons. For those that are new to our little show here, the winner gets a button. So with the Northern Kentucky History Hour logo on it. So thank you so much, Mr. Antel, for playing our quiz. We appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who submitted answers. Let me see here. So Jeannine, because I did not have my proper notes in front of me at the beginning, I completely botched your bio, which I apologize. So for those that want to know more about our wonderful guest, I have posted her bio in the chat. So please take a moment to check that out. We do really appreciate you being here, Jeannine. And I live not far, it turns out, from Sanford town that I didn't even know about. And so I am looking forward to maybe driving down there soon and just kind of looking around. That's a really awesome story. So thank you so much for that. And thanks to the participant who brought that to our attention. So we did have a couple of other questions though, Jeannine. One of them is, you know, you showed that list of the fortifications that were in both Ohio and Kentucky.
Yes.
And we were wondering, was there a fortification actually in downtown Cincinnati, in addition to the, you know, flank sides of Price Hill and Mount Adams?
Not that's listed, no.
Okay.
The ones up on the hills were the only ones. And those, they call them platforms, so they're not necessarily earthworks, but just flat areas up on the tops of the hills with cannon, so they could watch the river traffic.
Gotcha. And I know that we said we're not going to dwell too much on what you already talked about last week, but can you talk a little bit again about who, you know, you mentioned there were like 150 soldiers at one point. Can you talk just a little bit about who they were and where the soldiers themselves came from?
The ones at the end of the war, from 1864 to 1865, were what they would call convalescent soldiers. So most of them were soldiers who had been injured in battles and had recovered but couldn't go back to active duty. There's a letter from 1864 that actually talks about that. Simpson was actually complaining because he wanted more soldiers and they sent him convalescent soldiers instead of active regiments. There have been a lot of people running around in 1864 stealing horses, renegades and deserters and things like that. 1861 to 1862, like when Whittlesea was here, those were regular regiments, and I don't have it with me, but we do have a list of those. And then September of 1862, of course, there were, I don't know, probably 20,000 regular regiments, and then there were all the short-term squirrel hunter militia 30-day enlistments. Most of those men went on to join regular regiments. And then from then on, they probably had several hundred here, at least 1862 to 1864. And then as they were needed elsewhere, the active regiment units were called off and sent elsewhere. So he was down to 140 by 1864 and 115 by 1865.
And I assume that was just because they felt like the threat was elsewhere at that time.
Yeah, they needed him more.
Yeah.
By then.
Okay, we have several more questions now. The next question is, are we able to access the battery in Devou Park?
Good luck.
Yeah. I've hiked to one of them. I believe it was Bates.
Yes, Bates is the most accessible. If you can get in there and find the military road, or farm road, which is pretty obvious, and you can find the bottom of the hill, and then you can go up the hill. It's not really marked trail signs for various reasons. We had a lot of trouble over the decades, especially in the 80s, 90s with vandalism. And every time we tried to put something up there, it got torn down because there were people riding ATVs up there, and they were kind of destructive of things that we had done. So we didn't put any signs out. We didn't want to call attention to because of metal detector people. The Battery Bates is fairly accessible. We do, hopefully we'll be able to do again, maybe in the fall or in the winter, hikes up to there. Battery Coombs is all the way out on the hill overlooking Bromley. I've been there not even once a year, maybe once every couple of years. It's really hard to find unless you go in January or February, just because that part of the park had been farmed before it was in the park. And so it's totally overgrown with brambles and honeysuckle. And you probably have to crawl through it in the summertime. And that's a big problem. Sooner or later, we want to get back out there, but we kind of keep that one secret because it's not been excavated. But technically they're accessible if you can get up there in the park.
Right. Sounds like you need a little bit of an adventurous spirit, maybe.
Yeah, good hiking boots. It's amazing when you're up in there that you're that close to downtown Covington and Cincinnati, and you can feel so remote.
Yeah.
When you're out in the woods there.
For sure. Very peaceful. We saw a deer when we were there, just very still. It was very nice. Again, at Bates, we didn't make it to Coombs, but okay. Everyone's favorite question. When did Fort Mitchell go from 1L to 2?
Don't know. There is one, actually in Simpson's 1865 report, he spells it with 2 L's. And I think whenever they decided, to make Fort Mitchell the town name, I think the natural inclination is to spell it with 2 L's.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it kind of was from an early on, then it had that. Yeah. Let's see. Just trying to move forward on the questions. Okay, this might be our last question. We might have time for one more after this. How were members of what became the Black Brigade conscripted? Were they volunteers or forced? Okay, we talked a little bit about that last week. Yeah, they were forced. They were rounded up. Now, everybody was. The Irish immigrants, the German immigrants, they were all pretty much conscripted and gathered together. And whoever was in charge of the free Black men to begin with herded them actually over into the cattle pens on Mill Creek. And as conscripted men where they were not allowed to leave or whatever. And once Wallace heard about that, then they gave him a choice. And he put Dixon in charge of them. And they went and said, look, you don't have to do this. But if you do, we'll pay you the same as we're paying the German and the Irish immigrants.
and twice as many men came back the next day. But think about it, right? They're in Cincinnati. They're free in Cincinnati. But if once they crossed that river, they were in Kentucky. They're in a slave state. If they say they got separated from their unit, they could have been kidnapped and sold back into slavery. So they took a huge risk to cross that river and work on digging rifle trenches. So yeah, they were volunteer, but they were given a choice. And, you know, like I said, twice as many came back the next day to volunteer.
Gotcha. Wow. Thank you for going over that again. Okay, quickly, I had a question, and I would say maybe I'm going to turn this into a little bit of a broader question. If somebody wants to really know more about this, is there a particular book that you would recommend? Another person asked, you know, could they get a copy of one of the maps? How would someone go about, you know, continuing to learn more?
Well, of course, there's the James Ramage Civil War Museum, which is open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and it's free admission. Has a lot of the local history. Behringer-Crawford has a Civil War section as well. The Our Moment of Glory book at the moment is out of print. We had permission from the Giesland family, and we reprinted it, updated it, and reprinted it. And all those copies that have been printed just ran out. And if any of you know who Bob Clements was, he passed away way too young. And we couldn't find the original document, you know, for the reprint. An NKU student has since retyped the entire book.
Wow.
And so either this year or for next year, with the virus and everything, has put a crimp in a lot of things, but we will be reprinting that book. So Our Moment of Glory, which has been updated with lots of different articles, will be reprinted hopefully soon. That 1864 map, the one that we got real close in on, that is on the National Archives website, and you can download that high quality version from the National Archives. If you search like Cincinnati Civil War maps, that one comes up that you can download. The 1877 one's available also. You can find it, or I can email it to people.
Okay. Oh, we got a new person joining us. Okay.
Oh, just missed it. Oh my
gosh. Okay, last question. Is the Wallace you mentioned related to the person for whom Wallace Woods is named? Wallace Woods, the neighborhood in Covington.
Ooh, I don't think so. Lou Wallace is from Indiana. Okay. Not from here. So I think that's a totally different person.
Different Wallace. Okay. Oh, actually, sorry, one more. Was Fort Wright located where the Fort Wright City building is now?
Yes, as far as we know.
As far as we know. Okay. Well, Jeannine, thank you so very much. Everyone who has joined us, thank you so very much. Again, if you have any questions about Behringer-Crawford Museum, please go to bcmuseum.org or see our Facebook page where we are streaming this live. And so if you missed it, or if a friend missed it, they can watch it again anytime on Facebook, and last week's episode as well. If you want to support more programming like this in Northern Kentucky, we would love for you to become a member of Behringer-Crawford Museum. We also want to say thank you to the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum and to Ms. Kreinbrink for her participation tonight. If you have not gone to the Ramage Museum, I would highly encourage you to do so. I know there probably won't be one of the reenactments for a while just because of the situation with the virus, but if once that happens again, my family and I have been, and it's always a wonderful event. Next week, we will be speaking with a fellow member of our Behringer-Crawford Museum Board of Trustees, Pam Markham. She has been doing a significant amount of research on the Revolutionary War veterans who moved to this area following the war, who received land grants. And she does a lot of genealogy work in regard to the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's fascinating. And so not only is she going to be able to talk about some of the people who moved here following the Revolutionary War, but she's also going to give us a little insight about how she does a lot of her research. So look forward to that. And then the following week, we have a couple different ideas. So check back on our Facebook page and we'll provide an update as soon as we know. Thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a great night. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.